What's going on, everybody? It is Good Luck Steph or Madman Plant, however you want to call it. We are here with our episode of Vindec Eu, and I want to welcome everybody to Vindec Eu. This is where healing isn't a destination, it's a declaration. Each week, we spark to talk to real people navigating trauma, burnout, and purpose because behind every story, brand, business, or hustle is a human being. Tonight, we're diving into mental health side of entrepreneurship because, as you know, nobody is alone. Tonight, we have Terry, and Terry was in a fire accident that changed everything at 6 years old, and I'm really excited to bring him on. However, before we start, I do want to let you know that our next live panel is September 26th, which is a Thursday at Always Flavored in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And we are looking for people to be on the panel. So if you have a story and you want to share it, this panel is built for you. So without further ado, let me bring Terry on.
Hello.
What's going on, Terry?
Doing pretty good, my friend. How about you?
I am doing excellent. I'm glad that you're here with me tonight. I'm actually really excited because before we got on the podcast, you told me that this is your first podcast. So I'm even more excited to have you on.
Heck yeah, man. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, I think it's important for people who have stories, motivation, purpose, and are using that to change their lives and other people's lives, a place where they can tell their story. Because, and the reality is, I believe that story is so important because it changes everything. And for a lot of people that are going through trauma or burnout, or in your case, a horrific accident, it's where do we go from there? So let's just jump into it, shall we?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So talk a little bit before we talk about the accident. Talk about life growing up. You're 6 years old. What is life like, back then?
So about that time frame when I was 6 years old, I was living with my dad and my two older brothers in a really small town in Nevada. So it was really boring, not very eventful. So for me, in that sense, it was really just kind of getting into kindergarten around that time frame and just really hanging out with my brothers and my dad in the middle of the desert. Honestly, there wasn't really a whole lot going on.
And then with that, what is your brother's name?
So my brother above me is Ryan, and the brother above him is Jason.
And then are you the middle child, or how does that work?
I'm actually my dad's last child, so I was the baby of the family in that sense. Although I do come from a family of about seven in total. So there are two below me. So I'm kind of in the middle. I mean, you can't really go too much in the middle of the seven.
So being in the middle is like kind of like Malcolm in the middle, if you will.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
That's awesome. So when you were 6 years old, what are you into? Are you into superheroes or GI Joes? Like,
Oh man, what I was really big into in that time frame was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I was a huge fan of the Turtles. If it wasn't the Turtles, it was Superman. I was really big into Superman as a kid as well. So I wasn't the biggest superhero kid out there, but I definitely had my interest in at least those two.
you know what? Now, are we talking about the 1990s movie Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
Yeah, like Secret of the Ooze and stuff like that.
Yes.
Yep.
Growing up, I was a huge fan of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. My favorite Ninja Turtle is Raphael. I used to have the little play set communicator. I had the van toy that unpacked, and then it had like the city built into it. You remember that?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And they eat my favorite food, which is pizza.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, man. Pizza is one of my favorites. It's one of the top
What's
food groups.
what's your second favorite?
Second favorite pizza.
No, like besides pizza, what's your second favorite?
Second favorite. I like a good steak, man. I'm a
There
steak
you
man
go.
myself. Hmm.
Have you ever had a Manhattan cut?
No, I have not.
Oh man. Maybe one of these times I'll have you come down to the actual studio and visit my friend's meat shop. A Manhattan cut is a very select cut, and
Hmm.
we get it every once in a while, and it's very, very lean. And it
Okay,
is like butter, it'll melt in your mouth. Like it is
sold.
amazing.
I'm sold. You had me at steak, but now I'm sold.
So with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which one was your favorite Ninja Turtle?
I want to. If I now you're making me kind of go back to all this. I want to say it was Donatello.
Donatello?
Yeah, it was just. But I mean, honestly, Splinter was my utmost favorite.
You like the enemy?
Yeah, I kind of like his spunkiness. Come on, you gotta leave me alone.
I just thought all that headgear that he wore is just so heavy, 'cause if that's real like steel or whatever. That's got to be like 20 pounds right there.
Right? Yeah, right. No, and it's just the whole like I don't know, just the way that he was. I just as a kid, that was just kind of my thing. I don't know why.
That's awesome. Okay. So growing up in the desert, which I bet I go to Las Vegas once a year for MJ
Mhm.
BizCon, and I will have to say, I guess maybe if you don't live there, it's kind of nice because
Mhm.
around where I live, it's all just greenery and trees and all that.
Yeah.
So, what was your favorite part about growing up in that area?
Really, one of my favorite things about it was that it was warm like all the time, right? Because my family's from Washington State initially, but most of my memories are from living in Nevada. But what I really liked about it was just the adventures my brothers and I would go on. We were really big about going out and catching lizards, and just exploring the desert. And honestly, it was a lot of fun. Part of our whole thing was we get like dust devils all the time, and so we just chase dust devils around, catch lizards, and just be kids.
So, your average, growing up and everything. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
So, let's talk about the biggest thing. So, at 6 years old, you were burned in an accident where you almost lost your fingers in the fire. You suffered severe burns across your body, requiring multiple reconstructive surgeries.
Hmm.
You spent years in and out of hospitals and treatments and recovery.
Hmm.
And then it says because of the accident and its ripple effect, you ended up in foster care.
Correct.
So that's a lot. So
Yeah.
let's dive into the first part, which is Terry was burned in the accident.
Yes. So this goes back to 1992, and I was 6 years old at that point in time. And like I was saying, I lived with my dad and my two older brothers down there, and uh, it was late August, and my dad asked me to go out and find my brothers and bring them home for dinner. So I went out and I was looking for my brothers, and I caught their voices coming down the road from where we lived. So I just started following it down the road, and I found my brothers. They were actually at a house that was about four houses down from where we lived. And as I was approaching this house, I could tell that their voices were coming out of a carport. And I was on the opposite direction of the house, or opposite side of the house of where the carport was. So I had to go walk around to find them where they were at. When I found them, they were in the back side of the carport. And I noticed that they were both standing back there and that they had like a bowl at their feet. And what I didn't know by that time of getting down there is that they had filled that bowl with some kerosene that they had found, and they were trying to light it on fire. Now, as I reached down there, or as I reached the area down there and came into the carport, they actually successfully lit the bowl on fire, and it scared them because of the flashover. So they kicked it. Well, what they didn't know is that I was standing on the other side of that carport, the direction that they kicked the bowl. So when they kicked it, it was just a wall of fire, and it actually ended up smacking me right in the chest. The bowl did, and the kerosene wrapped around me like a wet blanket. And at first, I didn't even realize like I was on fire. I just could look around and see that like everything else looked like it was on fire, but it was truly me. And when the realization hit that it was me, is when my skin started burning. Um, and at that point in time for me, when I realized that I was on fire, like the pain and the confusion and everything had all hit at once. But I had remembered that, they had just taught us in school, stop, drop, and roll. And I tried to stop, drop, and roll, but it just wouldn't put anything out. And I pretty much had given up hope that I wasn't going to be able to do anything for it. But then the neighbor had just come home, and he had just come home from camping and saw that I was on fire. And he grabbed his sleeping bag and he ran over to me and tackled me with his sleeping bag, which effectively put out the fire. By the time he tackled me, I had been on fire for 2 whole minutes at that point in time. Um, and then it wasn't short after that the fire department showed up and they picked me up and they took me to the hospital. However, because this was such a tiny little town, it was like 500 people or so that lived there, from what I was told. The hospital just wasn't equipped to take care of my burns. However, luckily for me, also on that day, there is an airplane at the airport just outside of town that was able to actually air flight me down to Las Vegas, and that's where I'd start getting my initial treatments. Um, and then I was at I was at the Las Vegas hospital for a few months. About 2 months of that, they medically induced a coma for me just to try and get through the initial stages of it. But the Shriners Hospital, though, got wind of everything that was going on, and they actually took over my care and flew me out to Galveston, Texas. And then that's where I'd get like the amputation of my fingers and a lot of my first initial huge surgeries. And then after a few months of that, they wanted to bring me back home to Washington State. So I ended up coming up here to Harborview Medical Center, and that's where I would get the remainder of my surgeries over a period of about 10 years. Um, but after that first year of being in the hospital, I was in the hospital for a full year solid in Harborview and between Harborview and the other two. And at the end of the year, they tried to send me home because I was experiencing something that, ironically enough, is called surgery burnout. And essentially, my body was just under too much stress. So they wanted me in a home environment to try and take off some of that stress. However, my family couldn't take care of me because even after the end of a year, I was still required about 5.5 hours of just bandage changes, and that didn't include other things as well. So it was just too intense for my family, and then that's when it was decided that I would be placed into a medically trained foster family. And I was with them for 4 years and went through about 17 surgeries in total with them. So that's how I ended up in the foster care as far as my family goes, is not being with them.
All right. Sorry, I was just making some notes here. So when you went to the back of the side of the carport that day, like, was there any, like in the movie Spider-Man, he gets that spider sense that something's off or something bad's about to happen. Was there anything like that when you went there, or was it just like one of those things where it was just innocent? You were just trying to figure out where people were. There was no preconception of danger or that, things were about to take a dramatic change for you?
That's actually a really good question. No, I didn't. Nothing really stood out different to me. I mean, other than like I saw that there was a dog bowl at their feet, but they were also hanging out with the dog there in the garage. So there wasn't any like correlation as far as, well, that's odd. But I just remember when I was there, my dad had given me like he'd given me the task of going and bringing them back to the house. And so like I had found them, but I was watching what they were doing at the same time. Um, it just didn't. I guess it just didn't register in my brain what they were doing with that dog bowl.
Now, with everything there, you're standing on the other side. They don't know that you're there, right? They're just focused on the dog bowl, the kerosene. When I was younger, I would fill a little pan up full of gasoline. I only did it a couple times, but my mom let me do it, which I don't know why she did. She said it was like a science experiment. And there was one time where I actually blew into the fire, and the fire like came back out at me. I didn't get burned or anything. I did get my hair singed a little bit. But with that being said, you're back there. They light it. It ignites. So, a big flash of fire. And it's just an instant reaction of them kicking it, right? So they don't know that you're there.
Nope, they had no idea I was on the other side of the carport because I was fairly quiet when I went into the carport.
Were you just being like quiet to be quiet, or like my son who's 10 who likes to be sneaky and likes to tiptoe through different rooms?
It was kind of I guess it was more along the lines as I was trying to figure out what they were doing. Like I hadn't actually approached them yet to tell them like, hey, Dad wants you guys home for dinner. It was coming around the corner, seeing that they were fiddling around with something, and I guess it was just the curiosity of what they were doing, and it just didn't register to say anything to them. So yeah, they had absolutely zero idea that I was on the other side of that carport.
Now, when the bull gets kicked, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything's coming at you. What does that look like? Like, how do you remember it as? Like, it all coming at you? Because you don't even realize immediately that you're even on fire or anything's happening right
Mm-hmm.
away. Because you said the pain and the confusion set in at the same time.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
So as far as the kicking portion of it goes, I don't 100% remember that section of it, but what I do remember is just looking around like the carport and at my brother's, and then like all of us, like everything looked like it was on fire because I was looking at everything through different colors at that point. And so that's the thing about kerosene, in case people don't know, is kerosene isn't like gasoline. It's actually thicker than gasoline. So it's one of those things that if you get it on you, it's going to take a second for itself to burn through the fuel that's on you and then get to the surface of your skin. So I had a couple of seconds that I was just looking around trying to figure out what was going on, especially looking through the fire. But yeah, as soon as it burnt through the fuel that was on my skin, it just went right into my skin. And then that's when everything just went haywire. It would I can't even describe to you the actual thought process that was going on, other than it was just like primal functions took over and everything else shut off, if that makes sense.
Is it one of those things where one time I was paintballing and I accidentally got shot in the back of the head by my own teammate, and
Mhm.
everything went completely silent. I got really loud ringing in my ears, and
Mhm.
I'm like looking around trying to figure out what the hell just happened. And
Mhm.
everything is starting to slowly fade in. Is like, what did you say? It's like that.
Oh yeah, yeah, very much so. Because once the pain kicks in, like everything else around you shuts off. Um, I remember hearing the fire. The fire itself was really loud. But I could also remember that like tunnel vision isn't even the best way to describe it because like you're trying to figure out what you're doing or what you need to do, but you don't know what that is. And so like it creates this really deep confusion, as well as the panic as far as, when you hurt yourself, obviously you want to stop whatever it is that's, hurting you. But in that moment, none of those functions exist. Like it's just chaos.
Now, when you were on fire, you mentioned that part of it was you remembered stop, drop, and roll, but you started rolling, and the fire wouldn't go out. And I forget where I experienced this. It wasn't me directly, but
Mhm.
I, I swear I remember it from something, and what I witnessed was the exact same. Maybe it's probably a video because I don't remember anybody directly that I know that was on fire, and that's not true. That it always just goes out immediately. What is in your mind when what you've been taught in school now is not working? Like,
Mhm.
is there a point in your mind at such a young age where you're conceptualizing death or like severe mortality or injury, or is it just such a shock that it's just like you don't know?
Oh, that's a good question. So after the stop, drop, and roll didn't work, because really that is good for like if you catch your clothes on fire with like a candle or something, because what you're really trying to do is just put out the material. But if it's a fuel, that fuel is going to burn until it no longer it has the fuel left, or if you can remove the oxygen from the source. Um, but once the stop, drop, and roll didn't work, because again, mind you, I was living in the middle of the desert, right? So I mean, everything was either gravel, sand, or blacktop, and rolling around in any of those, right after a long day of the summer heat was like going from one skillet to the next. So
Mm-hmm.
at that point in time, for me, I remember in my mind that there was no other options. Like I had pretty much kind of given up trying to figure out what to do because everything was just getting so out of control in terms of pain and everything else. However, when the neighbor came over with his sleeping bag and he actually threw the sleeping over bag over me and then tackled me over onto the ground. And I remember at that point when that happened and everything went black, I literally thought I died. Like I had a mental
Mm.
note, like the silence, because I was underneath the actual sleeping bag, but also I wasn't listening to the roaring flames in my ears anymore. Like it had come up in like a mental note of like, this is it, I died. Like imagine like if you turned your TV off of watching something, like that was exactly kind of how it was. Like everything just shut off. But then when I had that thought, then all the pain started kicking back in again, and it actually brought me back to reality that I was still there. Um, so yeah, I had thought that I died, but as soon as I crawled out, because I crawled out from underneath the sleeping bag, because there was a fire station that was across the lot from that house.
Okay.
And so when he tackled me, he immediately got up, ran over to the fire station, and as I'm coming out from underneath the sleeping bag, I looked up and I watched him run across the dirt lot. And then he was pounding on the door, and then he got the fire department on its way. That was like the first stage of like I kind of felt like everything was going to be okay because there was help on the way. But yeah, I really did thought I died when he put that sleeping bag on me.
Now, when I was younger, I almost took myself out by suicide by almost injecting myself with gasoline when I was younger. Now, I didn't actually inject myself, but I had put the needle to my leg. And then later in 2020, me and my wife were in a really bad car accident. And during both times, and I talk about this a lot, usually, in my opinion, when you think you're about to die or you're going to take your own life in an instance, um, there's a very cool, calming sensation
Mm,
where it's very like peaceful. It's very quiet. Like you ever been in a house by yourself and you can hear the house shift because
mm,
nobody's in it and you can just hear the natural noises.
mm,
And in that was an emotion for me. And when I was younger, obviously it was anger because I was not happy with my life. But
mm,
when I was in the car accident, it was a lot different, more of like sadness and everything. Not because I thought I was going to die, it was because of, in that case, what I'm working on as a person and everything hasn't fully been developed. And in your case, you're 6 years old. What type of emotion are you dealing with during that time? You're on fire. Is I know it's chaotic, but is there any sign of like self-reflection or subconscious thought about, okay, well, if I'm going to die today, like is there an acceptance that you're giving yourself where you're like, I must be dead because I can't hear the fire anymore and now everything's black. Like, talk through that. About, is there any emotion attached to that?
That's actually a really good question. Thinking back at it, when everything went dark and I couldn't hear the fire anymore, there was a little bit of sense of peace because at that point in time, like everything had stopped. Like what I was trying to accomplish was finally accomplished and getting things put out. Now, I didn't necessarily have a whole lot of time to experience emotions because what ended up happening next actually did give me some emotions. So by the time the fire department was coming out the door, my dad was already running down the street. My brother Jason had ran back home to tell him what had just happened. And so when I crawled out from underneath that sleeping bag and I saw the fire truck starting to come out, I initially had like that feeling like I'm going to be okay, like help is on the way. But then I heard my dad running down the road, like screaming, and instantly was like crippled with fear at that point in time because I know this is probably going to sound weird, but my dad had told me to go do something and I didn't complete it. And so for me, I was afraid because like I didn't do what my dad asked me to do. And so like I didn't even have necessarily panic of what just happened to me. I had more panic that I was going to get in trouble. And so like by the time my dad actually got down to me, that's when the shock actually started to kick in and I started just like on a replay, like Jason did it, Jason did it, Jason did it. Um so that like when I look back on that, like I can tell like there was a lot of fear that came from that because like my dad was a very strict man and it was one of those things that as kids like you always listen to what dad said because dad only told you once kind of ordeal. um so like I didn't necessarily have any of those like, okay, well if this is going to happen then I'm cool, like good with it, or have any other emotion that I can tell about other than that. Like that's the one thing that sticks out the most to me.
It's kind of funny. I share a sense with you when we were driving that day, and kind of like when the blanket went over you. A semi truck actually caused the accident. It T-boned another car and turned the car sideways. And when the car finally caught traction, it actually shot in front of the semi truck into the lane that I was in, and it spun around. And when it spun around, I hit it at 80 miles an hour. And just like you, I was driving my wife's car, and right before impact, I was like, Lacey's gonna be so mad at me. I was like, it's kind of like you. It's kind of my thought. I was like, I don't even realize that we're about to be in an accident. Just my wife is gonna be pissed off that I crashed her car. And she was
Right.
like, just so you know, I was never mad about that. And I was like, okay, good, because that's what I was worried about. But it's interesting because when the car came into the lane, and I can kind of relate to you where everything goes black, is I saw the airbag for a split second and everything just shut off. Like you said, like it's like watching a movie and saying, okay, well, we're done with that. And it's just done,
Yep.
you know. Um, in your thinking, looking back at it now, how do you comprehend 2 minutes of time as far as being on fire?
Man, I'll tell you what. 2 minutes isn't a really long time at all when you're
Unless you're
just
on
doing
fire.
unless you're on fire. Um, and it's something that when I think back to it, it just makes me extraordinarily grateful that I have what I have today. I've worked in the burn community quite a bit, doing a lot of volunteer work, and I've gotten to experience a lot of other burn survivors out there. And I'm just grateful that, in that 2 minutes, the damage that could have been done wasn't done. And I was able to walk away with what I have. It makes me very grateful, if that makes sense.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, any time I feel like you escape death, especially with the car accident much later in my life, and that's why part of this podcast even exists.
Mhm.
Vindec Eu, is I heal in Romanian because I'm Romanian.
Mhm.
So, the ability to heal others, yourself, is so vital because a lot of times it's our subconscious that are affected, or our relationships, or the way we see ourselves, or even treat ourselves. And that undealt with trauma, it doesn't seem like a big deal until you're trying to achieve something. And whether that's a better quality of life, whether that's just being free of the past, it's very hard. And then you go into a situation where now, just like my suicide survivors that I talked to, you have to live with life altering repercussions. You've lost fingers, you've been physically disformed. What is that like when you look at, like, when we look at like death, right? So in death, I think there's like 7 stages of feeling when it comes to death. The first 2 are denial and isolation, right?
Mhm.
When that happened, right, you get to the hospital. The first time you go to sleep and wake up is when? From after being burned.
Oh man, that's actually there's a bit of a chunk of time in between all of that, because essentially, if they didn't have me on pain management with, painkillers and stuff like that, that kept me in and out, in and out, in and out kind of ordeal. And then, like I had said in the story too, like I was put in a coma for almost about like a 2 month period, because essentially they need to reserve the brain to be able to just solely focus on healing itself. It's like putting your computer in a safe mode, to work on it, kind of thing. So for me personally, uh, I don't really remember a whole lot of the waking up and going to sleep, but what I can remember, is it was more like waves of consciousness.
Mm,
And like, either I would wake up in the middle of bandage changes, or I would wake up in the middle of a degrading process, or I would just wake up in my bed and I'm fully like bandaged up like a mummy, can't move, can't do anything, like can't even open your eyes. You can just hear and listen is all you can do until the next wave of drugs come along to knock you back out again. Um, but what I can say about those moments, though, is that those moments were touch and goes with reality for me. Just
mm,
because having the consistency of consciousness at the age of 6, and I mean, you're still really coming online as like just a person, right?
mm,
But having the consistency of consciousness, and then all of a sudden going into, you don't even know how much time has elapsed between the last time you woke up and then when you pass out and then come back again, like it's just that whole thing all over again. But in those moments, though, it's the whole reality of like, oh, I'm still here and I'm still doing this, and like you just have to learn to accept that and just kind of ride that wave, more or less. um, so for a good chunk of time, I would have to say up until they took me into Shriners, which was a couple months after being in Vegas. When I was in Shriners is where I finally started to get to the point to where, I could actually go to sleep at night and then wake up in the morning. That was difficult from my memory to kind of get into that routine. Practically slept for, a couple of months at that point.
Now, when you're in a coma, we've talked to several people who have been in comas. A lot of our gunshot victims have been in comas, self are induced, and some of them have had conversations. Some of them have been judged by what they described as a full-on trial.
Mhm.
Some of them had talks with a higher power, like
Mhm.
Tristan, for example. When he shot himself, when he said he went, and it wasn't like a god, it was like a higher power,
Mhm.
and pretty much the higher power told him that you can keep doing whatever you want, but I'm going to keep you here on earth. It's not your time, and until it's your
Mhm.
time to go, you're not going anywhere. And
Mhm.
he said that he yelled and screamed. Is there any point in your coma where you dealt with spirituality, or like a parallel universe where you maybe were somewhere else before you re-entered your body fully and consciously?
That's a really good question as well. I'm a firm believer that the place that you go when you are in a coma, like you're on the doorstep to the next plane, like that, because you're not here, but you're nowhere at the same time. And for me personally, I didn't quite have the step over into the next plane because I believe that in that space as well, you are your subconscious in a lot of ways. And let me explain that. So when I was in a coma, I had this reoccurring dream, like consistently, almost over and over and over. And I was in the ground in a big hole, just sitting in, like if someone just dug a giant hole in the ground, and I was in this hole, but there was no stars above in the sky. Like the sky wasn't blue, it was just black, nothing above it. But there was a light that was sitting next to the hole where I was at. But there was somebody at the top that was throwing dirt with a shovel into the hole. And every time that happened, I would stomp down a little bit of the dirt, and of course, would eventually get to the point to where you can almost step out of the hole. Um, and the reason why I believe that this is really a subconscious thing is because in that dream, the person that was throwing the dirt into the hole was our old landlord, John. And I had very little experience with John whatsoever. I just knew him from a couple of interactions before the accident. But as soon as I would get close to the top of that hole and I was able to get out, all of that dirt would fall out from underneath me, and then I would wind right back up at the bottom of the hole again, and then I would have to go through this process over and over and over and over again. And it took me a lot of years of thinking about that and kind of soul searching on that. And what I really took from that is that was my time that I was fighting for survival, even in the unconscious state like that. And so for me personally, I believe there was a lot of subconscious stuff at work then and there. I did have other experiences after that, though, that did kind of go into a spiritual realm.
Now, when you're laying there, right, and goes back to the first topic, and kind of what we're just talking about right now is there a part of you that's like, why did this have to happen to me? Why am I being punished? Or why did I even go over there that day? Because like a lot of times you have like survivor's guilt where it's
Mhm.
like, but why me? Why do I have to suffer this pain? Because now technically you're in your own prison, literally
Mhm.
every day. You're in a bed, you're being bandage changed, you can't move. How do you find peace and comfort at 6 years old while all of this is going on?
Well, in that particular situation, I guess the best way to explain it is that my brain was just solely focused on uh, the healing process. There wasn't a whole lot of departments on upstairs. For me, though, I will say that there was a lot of confusion, just because I didn't fully understand what happened, and nobody was talking to me as like the patient because I'm assuming that they didn't even know whether I was there or not. But it was just a lot of confusion, and I do remember during waking up during bandage changes and like seeing parts of my body and stuff like that. And it was terrifying because the body that I once knew was no longer there. And so for me, it was a shock to see the disfigurement that had come from the accident. So between the being terrified of what I was seeing, being completely and utterly in pain from also the same thing that I was seeing, there was a lot of my brain was a lot on hyperdrive, and it really wasn't room, I guess you would say, to kind of start getting to that stage of like, why did this happen to me? Um, in that particular sense.
Now, was there ever a sense where you just wanted to give up and you were just like pull the plug, or I don't want to do this anymore? Where, and I guess you'd mentioned it when you got moved from the one hospital to Washington, is the burnout through, I guess, the surgeries and everything.
Hmm.
What keeps you going? Like, why didn't you just, you know,
Well,
succumb to your own demons in your mind at that point?
and I'm not gonna lie, I had those moments. There's a process called the debrading process, and when you're burned, they need to take off all the dead skin, right? Because you can't leave the dead skin on. It can go necrotic, poison your bloodstream, and then kill you fairly quickly if you don't. So they go through this debrading process, and they essentially just put you in a big surgical tub, and then they just start scrubbing your skin with surgical scrub brushes, and they have to do this like multiple times. Um, and I would remember that after I mean, that process by itself was absolutely grueling. There's no amount of pain meds or anything that can dull that particular kind of pain. And then I would have those thoughts of I can't do this anymore, because being in my bed with bandages on and a sheet on top of that, I could still feel like when somebody would walk into the room and you get a little bit of air disturbance, like that by itself would just reignite the fire all over again. And of going through that constantly, of having that feeling of being lit on fire all over again, I always tell people the fire was nothing compared to the process that came after. I was like, the fire was the easiest step of all of them. It's the recovery, the degrading, the bandages, all of that stuff is 10 times worse than the fire itself. Um, and there was a lot of the times during that stage when I was conscious, that I mean, and it's only mentally, and because I wasn't physically able to speak at that time, so it was all just mentally of like, I just can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. And then you'd pass out and wake up again in another time frame, and it wouldn't be as bad. Um, I didn't really, I don't think I ever really had uh, too many points where I really gave myself the opportunity though to quit. Um, and if you're asking me what really kept me going, I had a near death experience from this process, because I died 6 times because of just the trauma in itself. And I think that near death experience is honestly what really gave me the strength to move forward.
Now, when we talk about dying 6 times, is this dying during all those surgeries to the shock to the body? Is this, you laying in your bed and then your heart stops? Like how are the deaths counted for you?
I only remember one of them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know exactly how the other ones really played out. I don't know if it was in the middle of surgery or if it was just laying in a bed or whatever have you be. Um, but the one that I do remember was during a surgery, because I when you're under anesthesia, it's just the same exact concept as being in a coma, right? Like you're just in this void and there's nothing, you have no sense of self, time, anything. Uh, but I remember at one point, I had like an out of body experience, and I remember seeing the shoulders, looking over the shoulders of the doctors that were working on me on the table, and I remember seeing me on the table. However, that only lasted for like a few split seconds. And then, like, the next thing I know is that there was this giant flash, and it was like one of the brightest things that I've ever still even seen to this day. And then after that flash happened, I remember like I was on this battlefield and there was like utter chaos, like bombs going off everywhere, bullets flying. But I was sitting next to this like soldier that was in a foxhole, and he had his rifle, holding his rifle in his arms, but he was absolutely terrified. And then I was there for what seemed like maybe even just a couple of minutes. And then the next thing I came to was a completely different realm. And in this realm, again, there's still no sense of body, time, nothing. But I remember seeing this linear line that was like if you're looking at music on a computer and how it has the waves up and down. That's how I was seeing this, was in that kind of a fashion. It was just all energy. And after looking at it for a little bit, I realized that it was my lifeline, like everything that I've done in my life and then everything I would have done in my life. And then I remember very distinctively hearing very clearly, do you wish to stay or do you want to go back? And then that timeline made even more sense to me because I was shown what my life would be like if I went back and what things would look like if I didn't go back. So like it showed me the implications of the choices I was making. And there was a lot of emotion, like very deep and like just very deep emotion in that particular time frame. And then the next thing I remember is I was waking up by myself in my hospital room, all bandaged up. Nobody was in there, but the Jungle Book was playing on the TV. And it was the part where Baloo and Mowgli are floating down the river singing Bare Necessities. And I will not forget it to this day. I just had this deepest seated peace inside me that everything was going to be okay. But this was truly the beginning of the journey. And so from like that moment moving forward, like I've just always had this light inside me that's just like, you can't quit yet. And like, I've just never questioned it.
I love that. I think that is great. Now, let's talk about the timeline because that's very unique. Now, you have no sense of self. You're in a parallel universe. Like you were in a battlefield, and then what? So what was A and B then? So what was your life if you had stayed, and what was your like if you had gone back? Can you describe those? What the options were given to you is?
I don't remember the events themselves, but what I remember seeing was the family, how they would turn out if I stayed and continued down that path, uh, or if I went back. And that's where all
And
the emotion came in because it really showed what kind of effect it would have on my family had I not gone back.
it kind of almost reminds me of one of my wife's favorite movies. Have you ever seen Into the Void?
I have not.
Oh man, for somebody that's been in experiences like you have, I think you would find profound value in watching it. It's really cool. It's about this guy who was like a shitty drug dealer,
Hmm.
and he gets in this like shootout with the police, and he winds up dying, and he has to see what his death does to each person after he dies, and it's
Mm.
all from like the top point of view down, and it's really interesting. I've only seen it a couple times. My wife is knows way more about it, but it is a fantastic movie. Now, question for you: when you say go back or stay, does that mean it's called Enter the Void? See, she's watching. I knew she was watching. Um, all right, you got to get some people to watch. Why not be your wife? She said she's watched it at least 10 times. Now, when you meant go back or stay, you mean like which one is death or which one is living?
That's a good question. Stay was to die, and then to go back would be to come back here.
Now, is there a voice attached to this when this timeline is presented? How is this articulated to you? Is it like digital where you're like it's in the future, you're watching everything on like TV screens, and one's like this and one's like that? Like, how is the timeline presented?
The best way that I could really explain it in that sense is it's almost the same concept as if you're recalling a memory, you know, except for these memories have already happened and they've happened before you made them, if that makes sense.
Okay. Is there any direction that's like a grim reaper or like Jesus or a higher power that's with you at this time? That's whether they're silently pointing or they're speaking to you. Is there any conversation at all, or is it all just you by yourself?
You know, that's actually a really cool question because I haven't really thought about that myself. But in the sense of that, um, being in that place, I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel alone at all. I actually felt very comfortable. There was absolutely no worry, there was no pain, there was nothing that was really that of a negative experience. But at the same time, when I heard the whole "Do you wish to stay or do you want to go back?" I in that sense, somebody wasn't like right there standing next to me or within the vicinity of me, but they were just all around me, if that makes sense.
No, it's very interesting because your like testament to other people's and even different situations, it's very interesting because it's kind of like I could take part of this story and put it into that person's story, and I could take that person's experience with spirituality and coma and dying and everything, and it may not be the exact thing, but just tiny little pieces. And it's just very interesting how we're so unique. We live so many different lives and have so many different experiences. But when it comes to death and dying or trauma or, heartache in some aspects, there's singularities that are very similar, almost like patterns. So it's
Hmm.
just very cool to kind of hear this from you. So what I want to talk about too now is when you looked at yourself for the very first time, when was that? Because you said there were times where you couldn't even open your eyes, you could just hear.
Hmm. Hmm.
What was the first time you ever saw yourself again after the accident?
I don't think I truly got to see myself like in a reflection until I got to Hospital, and that was, um, and I believe that it was in just like the mirror that was on the wall in my room. Now, the first time I saw myself, I was fully bandaged up. Like I couldn't necessarily see what my actual skin looked like. I can see like, you know, where the eye slits were, I could see that there was scarring under it, but I didn't really know the full severity of it. But the very first time that I really got to actually just look at myself and see myself, you know, my brain tried to comprehend that as much as possible, but you know, in reality, I thought I was looking at a monster, you know, and it was just so hard to swallow that pill that the person looking at me back at me in that reflection was truly who I was. I did not know how to embrace it. You know, I mean, at 6 years old, you're just starting to live your life in your body really as your own person, right? So like it changed and I didn't know how to accept that. And it did definitely put me into a bit of a spiral for a little bit.
Now, thinking back, you're in the mirror or you're in your reflection. If
Mhm.
you could think of three emotions you're feeling at that time, what would they have been?
Let's see. I would say confusion was the first one, just because it was really difficult to get my brain to comprehend that it was really me that I was looking at. Then it was followed by anger, and the anger was because like, why does this have to be me? Like, why did I have to change like this? Um, and then I guess the third one. Let's see. The third one, I guess, would be kind of, I would say, is more curiosity, because I didn't know what I was looking at. And I didn't understand, I've never seen a burn survivor before that point. Like, this was a very first for me. So it was just like, as you were, like, as I was a kid, you'd watch movies with special effects and monsters. Like, that's what it reminded me of. But confusion and anger were the two biggest ones for me.
And at 6 years old, even with my son who's 10, experiencing and dealing with emotion can be very difficult because you don't necessarily know how to express yourself. And now you really don't know. How are some of the ways that you dealt with those two, anger and the confusion? Like how does a 6 year old make sense that a tragedy's happened and I'm going to rebuild from here?
For me personally, it was, and I know this is going to sound probably a little strange, but it was giving me the opportunities to actually try and be a kid again. When I came up to Washington and I was at Harborview Medical Center, they actually had a playroom for the kids. Now, granted, I wasn't necessarily in the shape to be able to play in all the toys and stuff like that, but they had like a Nintendo, they had board games, and they had other things that you could do to occupy your mind. And for me, it was just gradually just kind of trying to get back to those roots, as being the youngest brother. Like, we had Nintendo at home, but there was a Nintendo there. No one was ever playing it. So I got to play a lot of video games. And what I have found is working with kids too. One of the best ways for them to get over those two particular things, or to start processing and working on those two things, is to provide them an environment to be a kid. And when you give them that opportunity, kids will start to do what they do best and bounce back. Now, I mean, it wasn't the fix all for me to have that, but it was just enough breathing room for me to not have to constantly think about it, if that makes sense.
Oh, it absolutely does. Play therapy, and remember, I'm not a mental health professional or expert, but play therapy is a great way, especially for children. We own a video production company, and we worked with the company Only Make Believe, and they
Mhm,
started in New York, and they're also here in Washington D.C. And what they do is they put on plays and they get volunteers and they set up either in the main location of the hospital or they'll go to independent rooms and they'll
mhm.
they'll put on skits.
Oh,
And when
cool.
we were filming it, just like it describes in the video, you see all these kids that are sick. They got tubes in their nose. They're using
Mhm,
walkers. They're in wheelchairs. Sometimes they don't have hair or eyebrows. But they come in and you see sick kids. But
mhm,
within 20 minutes of playing, you don't see sick children anymore. You
mhm,
see children dancing, children laughing, having fun. And it's almost like their ailments for a split period in time through that ha- are alleviated.
yep.
And I think that is so great for you to be able to articulate that because I got to witness it making the video about the organization and it's so true. And I
Mhm,
think that is the power about being a child is you still have your imagination. You still have hope where maybe if you're older, it could feel way more like a life sentence versus in a situation like yours where you're really starting to adapt and you're really starting to get back to who you are.
mhm. Yeah. And one of the things that really helped me uh, in my stage was it from the very, very beginning of me being conscious all the time and really starting to be uh, walking down this journey, was like I had a very strong sense of independence. And what I mean by that was, like when I just I wanted to feed myself. I wanted to do things myself. I didn't want people to do things for me. I just had this very strong conviction to be independent, which, that on top of being able to be a kid in the playroom, and once my personality really started coming out, then the nurses on that floor really started to really take to me even more. And then that nurtured me even more into what being more steps away from the anger and that confusion step as well. So, it was just like the planting of a seed. It just grew a little bit each day.
No, I mean, and that's all you can hope for. I mean,
Mhm.
it really is a journey.
It
And,
is.
whether you're dealing with a life altering accident or just yourself, that ability to move forward and to give yourself the hope and, the ability to make it through is invaluable, because a lot of people, want to give up. There's times where we all want to give up, so
Yeah.
what we're going to do is take a 5-minute break, and we'll be back in 5 minutes for our second round of the interview. This will give everybody a chance to refresh. I need to get a new drink here myself. So I will see you back here at 6:10.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you, brother.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Bring Terry on here. How's it going?
Good. Good to be back.
I don't believe we've spoken before. No, I'm just kidding. So, all right. So, this is really great. And I'm glad that we're going into this. I went upstairs and talked to my wife real quick, and I got some game plans for our conversation. So, I want to continue the great conversation. One thing that we have is you had mentioned that the hospital wasn't equipped in the beginning. You were flown to Las Vegas. That's where the medical coma happened. Then you were introduced to Shriners, which I'm a Mason. So to be a Mason or to be a Shriner, you have to be a Mason, which I'm not a Shriner, but I am a Mason. So that's pretty awesome. And they do take care of everything. And that's one of the cool things about the Shriners, especially children. When you were in the foster care, right? So we had quickly discussed that a little bit. Let's talk about what's that like, because right, so you're with your family, trying to battle all these moving pieces, going to hospitals, dealing with the bandage changes, all the intense stuff that you have to do, and then you get separated from your family. So what is that like? And do you how does that make you feel that the people that are supposed to take care of you in a sense aren't able to, because in a sense like this, you really need expertise or you could get infection and die essentially.
Yeah. To be honest with you, the separation from my family was not the separation from them wasn't very impactful. And the reason behind that is I'd already spent an entire year inside of the hospital, and being in the hospital also meant that my family was a little ways away. So they couldn't actually just come visit me whenever they wanted to. I would get random visits, periodically. So I didn't actually really see them a whole lot anyways. Um, Now, when it came time to try and go home, I went home to my mom's house because my mom and dad are divorced. So I went home to live with my mom, and she had come and taken all the training to try and take care of all my bandages. But it just wasn't working out. She couldn't handle the workload. She had other kids to worry about. So I was only home for a very short period of time. And then from that point, then I ended up getting introduced to the foster home, to where they would take over my living situation. And to me, at that point in time, it was just another move. I didn't really have any kind of struggles as far as not seeing my family goes. Um, in the foster family that I was with, they really welcomed me into their home with open arms, and they were there was a mom, the dad, and then they had two daughters, and then so it was already more of a home situation than even my own home was, just because it was a single mom with five kids at that point in time in the house. It was just chaos. So at their house, it wasn't chaos. So it was actually a fairly easy transition.
Yeah, I guess so. And in the foster home too is, they're trained in it. So the
Mhm.
alleviation, the care, the direct understanding of needs for yourself is probably a lot more great there. So versus the home life. Now, how did that affect your relationship with your parents as getting older? Did you ever feel like abandoned, or like maybe they should have been there or tried harder? I'm sure in a way, it's like you almost got kidnapped away from your family. It's like one day you were in your neighborhood and next thing you're in a bunch of hospitals and now different states and different places.
No, I never really had anything, in the terms of like feeling like they abandoned me, because when the accident happened, my dad went down to Vegas and he spent all the time he could with me when I was at Vegas. And then when I went to Shriners, that's when my mom came down and flew me back up to Washington. So I got to spend a little bit of time with both of them after the accident, which for me Again, prior to the accident, my parents divorced when I was like 4, and you don't really remember a whole lot from when you're 4. So I never really had memory of my parents being together, but having them with me after the accident was really nice. Um, but with going into the foster care, I mean, my care was still so intense that like I needed good care. And unfortunately, that was just not something my mom could provide. And because of the accident, my dad wasn't able to, step in and do any kind of care. But he wouldn't have had the ability to do anything either because he just didn't have the kind of training needed to be able to take care of my burns. So going into the foster care system was, it was actually pretty smooth, and I didn't have any uh, issues in the terms of feeling abandonment or anything like that.
Well, I guess that's a relief because I feel like in a sense though, it could have been both ways, depending on your mindset and how everything was. And I'm sure your parents, in the same time, they're freaking out because,
Mhm.
now their child's away from them and they're constantly worried and, you know, um with this being said, so after you get through the foster care, what graduates somebody in the program like this? Like, how do you not need bandages anymore, or like how do you just one day not need to be in the hospital and now you can be back in the real world?
That's a good question too. It's the healing process, because I was with them for 4 years. In the healing process, the burns, they heal, they get better, and you get your skin to come back as much as it will, and so sores close up, and surgeries, they heal up, and it was a lot of therapy. Therapy was the biggest thing for me, being able to like stretch out what I could for my skin and get range of motion back, different things like that. Years of that is honestly what got me to the stage of just kind of living what I always call the actual life of living. Um, and then it was also a lot of being introduced to things that would keep me like physically active as well. Like when I learned how to ride a bike, that was the most amazing thing ever because now I was riding a bike and I was being mobile. I was doing what kids like to do, and then it's just one thing kind of trickles right into the next. And what it really is it's really just the confidence coming back at that stage, because once the skin heals, you still have a lot of other healing to do. And yeah, the confidence was a big thing for me that got me through a lot of that.
Now, when you're working on yourself, like the basic things like taking care of yourself or going to the bathroom
Mhm.
or other things like that, how does it how does that work in the human mind when you actually have to relearn something that you already know how to do, but because of your injury, because you've lost fingers and everything like that, I'm sure you do things slightly different than you used to, right? How does that work? Like, how does the subconscious say, you know what, I've accepted this and now I'm able to really pursue the education of doing this again?
Mhm. Mhm. I think I was kind of in a sweet spot, so to say, in the terms of things like that, because I mean, even at 6 years old, you're still learning how to do certain things. I think that it was not too long before, or no, I hadn't even learned how to tie my shoes yet by the time that the accident had actually happened because I was wearing Velcro shoes. Um, when it happened to me, though, one of the greatest things that I think that I had on my side is that the trauma really blocked out a whole lot of everything before the fire. So, like, I didn't have a whole lot of recollection of things prior, as far as how I did things. So, it wasn't really a rewiring of how to do things. It was just simply a learning how to do things. And so I was already in my mind kind of already in a fresh slate with the willingness and eagerness to learn how to do these things.
Now, with that being said, you get back into the quote unquote real world, Um, Obviously, people look at you. You know, when you first started interacting with people, I remember when there was COVID going on, right?
Mhm.
And we own a production company and we do real estate photography. And I went to this person's house, and I've never been treated in a way like this. But as I was getting closer to them, they kept stepping away. And every time I went to move, they kept directly moving out of the way because they were afraid that they might get COVID. Have you ever been in a situation when you first got out where it really impacted you how people perceived you after the accident, as far as the way you look and just the way you're set up? Like, how does the human brain deal with the fact that, no, I'm still a normal person, I'm still human, I may have had an accident that happened to me, but I'm still who I was?
Yeah. Obviously you don't see little kids with the significant amount of burns that I had. That's something that you just don't see every day. Now, getting back into public was really difficult. And the reason behind that is because I just spent all that time in the hospital surrounded by doctors and nurses, and people that understood my situation and were very compassionate individuals. And then, of course, when you go home to your family, your family also treats you the same way, and they treat you with the love and respect that they would give you regardless. But getting into public, it was very difficult because not only was I trying to learn in the new body that I had, I was also trying to understand why people treated me differently, because it was really difficult. I would go into stores and little kids would call me a monster. They would, call me names, and parents would shoo their kids away, and like I was not supposed to be around them. It was very difficult to actually really understand that part of it. Like, why don't these people understand the things that I've been through? Because I mean, in my own mind, I know what I went through. And that was the part that hurt the most, was because I would think of like, well, wow, I've gone through all of this stuff, and why are you going to treat me like that? Like, if you knew why I look like this, you wouldn't treat me like that. But I just didn't have the tools at the time to really voice that for myself. That would gradually start to come, and I always had a little bit of it inside of me that, that this was an accident, and this is who I am, and I'm a good person. But that doesn't mean that it still didn't hit home for me when people treated me differently, because I didn't understand how society worked at that time.
It's interesting that you say that, I went from an environment where everybody has compassion and understanding and understands what I went through. And you go back, I kind of relate it to people that are veterans who have been in the military and they've seen their good friends or their buddies die for freedom, and now they have to go back to a real world where nobody knows what they went through, nobody knows the bloodshed or the tears that they've cried, and they're just supposed to kind of fit in. And then you get looked at differently because now you're different. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? It's,
Yep.
how do you how do you perceive the world in a sense like that? Do you see the world as mean and everybody's against you? Do you see it as a lack of understanding and compassion? How do you define the world for people that have disabilities, that look different, that maybe have different stories than, other people?
Mhm. In that sense, at first I thought the world was cruel and the world was mean. I just thought that it was just a bunch of bullies out there. But over the 33 years of being a burn survivor and living in this world, what I've really come to understand it as is that, the world is, people are just curious creatures by nature, right? And we're all curious, and that, we're all always seeking to gain more knowledge on things. But when you see someone like me that comes around, there's a part in your human brain that sets me aside because I don't look the same as everybody else, and we all kind of have that ability. I mean, I will admit too, if I see somebody that's out in public, that part of my that has a deformity or something, that part of my brain goes off, and of course I want to see, well, hey, why is this person different? Um, And so over the years, I've really learned that, people aren't actually necessarily mean. There are mean people out there. Don't get me wrong. There are some people out there that just have no emotional intelligence whatsoever, and they're just rude, nasty people. But on the most of people, though, I believe people are just curious. And a lot of times when it comes to the staring is when you do see somebody like me and you start having these questions that are going through your mind of like, wow, what happened? You're like, what did he go through? And like, is he a nice person? Is he a bad person? Like, can I go ask him? Like, your brain is trying to process all these things all at once because you just landed in that situation. Um, and so for me, I've really learned to take like staring with a grain of compassion because this person is experiencing me for the first time. And in my world, this is completely normal, but in their world, this isn't normal because,
Mm,
either one, people in my situation, they just don't make it. They die. That's it. End of the road.
yeah.
You're not going to see them. Or they do make it and they don't have the ability to get out and go out into public because they're more introverted now. They don't want to be seen by society, and so people just don't see them. But then you have people that are like me, that's more extroverted, that does go out into society. And so by curious nature, yeah, people are going to stare.
My wife says that is a very considerate outlook. She also asked, at that age, was there anyone that significantly impacted your life in a positive way as a child that you can remember? Someone who saw you for you and not your burns.
Man, you just explained my very first mentor to a T.
That's awesome.
So I so I was introduced to summer burn camp here in Washington State in the mid 90s, about 93, 94, somewhere in there. And at camp, this summer camp, they have all kinds of activities, exactly what you would think a summer camp to be. There was swimming pool, there was hiking trails, there was archery, and like everything in between. But the one thing that really landed for me was archery. And I mean, at this point, I think I was about 7 years old. And to a 7 year old in the 90s, like archery that was huge. And I would have to go with my cabin to go do archery because you can't just not go to the events. And because at that time, I just didn't think I could do archery. Excuse me. However, we were going to archery and I was just intently watching my cabin mates do archery. And there was this man named Roger. Now, Roger wasn't a counselor, summer camp counselor or anything like that. Excuse me. But he was actually a guy that showed up to archery with all the supplies, the bows, the arrows, the safety guards, everything to do archery. Him and a group of guys would do this. And he saw that I was watching my cabin mates do archery, and he came over to me and he's like, "Do you want to do archery?" And I told him, I was like, "I can't do archery because my hands were still really raw and really not capable of holding a bow, let alone shoot one." And he told me, he's like, "Well, if you want to shoot, we'll find a way for you to shoot." So he had me put my hand into a plastic grocery bag and grab a bow, and he duct taped my hand to the bow. Now, this was allowing me to actually hold the bow. So that was step one, right? And then he set me up on the range and he helped me put arrows in the bow. And he taught me how to pull the string back. And even at that point in time, it hurt like hell because my hands were still really raw from being amputated and, still going through the burns. Um, but I shot that first arrow and it went all the way down range and it hit the target. And there was just something inside my brain that flipped. And it was instantly in that moment that I realized, like, wow, I just did this. I didn't think I could do this a minute ago. And so it was a seed planted that I could do whatever I wanted to do as long as I put my mind to it. And that's what Roger really taught me. And he saw me for who I was in that moment, this 7-year-old kid that wanted to shoot archery, which was his passion. And he transferred that passion to me that day. And he taught me that lesson that, as long as I'm willing to put my mind to whatever it is I want to do, I can accomplish it. And, so he became my very first mentor, and he changed the very trajectory of my life that day. And that's something that I still use, 32 years later down the road.
Like I said, the word trajectory, like the arrow of where it's
Yeah.
going to go.
Hmm.
That's really cool. I think, and that's why I have mentors as well. I think having people that do see you for you, whether it's a disability or whether, you have great ideas and the rest of the world doesn't recognize it, whatever it may be, having people that truly understand you, get you, feel you is so important because it allows us to realize that maybe we can't see it right now. But that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that none of the rest of the world doesn't see it. And sometimes one of the best things is sometimes people can see the things in us that we can't see. And I think
Exactly.
that's the beautiful thing because we may not think we have it, but we do. And we are recognize that through other people. So
Hmm.
through Roger, and this is where we're going to talk a little bit about, how you really kind of changed the perspective here is not only do you work in the fire department now, which we're going to talk about soon, but you also take the time to work with children who have situations that are like you in burn camps and other things. Where do you think that all came from? Do you think that's a part of Roger and just everything, all the nurses, the staff, and the people that just really helped you along your way? Where's the compassion come to give back and become an educator for those who are just like you at 6 years old, and now they're going to talk to you, and because you're going to have a relationship with them that only you two can because you're both survivors, you're going to change that person's life, and then the cycle of life and continues.
Yeah. Well, I do want to start there with saying I don't do firefighting anymore. I did firefighting for a few years and then ended up actually putting it down to work with nonprofit organizations that do work with burn children, to do that full time. And but in the terms of where that all came from for me was the realization that, you know, at that point in time in my life as an adult, I'd come to that realization that I have reached the point in life where I was because of the actions of others. And I saw how beneficial that was in my life. And I realized that the things that I've gone through, there are many others that have also are going to go through that same thing as well. And I remembered how much camp really changed me because had I not gone to camp in the summer as a kid, I would not necessarily have been the person that I had become. Because when I was at camp, I saw other burn children and I saw other kids that were just like me. And it was a lot of teaching from one kid to the next kid on just how to be a kid. We talk about our burns, we talk about our stories, we talk about the things we couldn't do. And then of course while you're there, like, they challenge you, they challenge you with the activities that are there, they challenge you with just being a kid. So when it came time for me to turn around and actually be like, you know what, hey, I'd like to actually go volunteer at camp, it was really a whole lot of idea of like, well, my life is where it's at right now because of a place like this. And if I could go back and be a summer camp counselor and I can work with these kids, that maybe just by being who I am, I can help them through the things that they're going through. So I started going back and I started volunteering as an adult. But what I really found in that sense though for me is like I had the mentality of like, okay, well, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna teach these kids, things like that. But what it really actually ended up turning out to be was that, these kids were just as much as a teacher as I was because they had shown me who I used to be. That kid that was trying to learn to be um, just a regular person again. They reminded me of the resiliency, the strength, the courage, and the dedication that it took to become the man that I was at that point in time. So that kind of bled into other things, such as firefighting and any of the other volunteer work that I've done.
Now, speaking of the firefighting, you said the first time that you did a fire exercise, you got paralyzed in a sense, right? Is that true?
Yeah, I
Because
kind
of
of got
all the fire and
it
everything.
was yeah, I had a little bit of a freeze moment for sure.
Hello?
Oh, there you go. I'm sorry, I looked like it stopped for a second.
I
You
think
got me
I'm
now?
lagging. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yep. I believe when we spoke previously, you had mentioned that when you had joined the fire department during your training, um, when it came to fire, that really brought back some trauma and it kind of froze you. It was a defining moment in your training. Was that correct?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So I mean, obviously, when you go to fire academy, you're gonna have to fight fire, right?
Mm-hmm.
The very first fire drill that we had was just to kind of show us how it worked, what it looked like, and the thing about how they do it, where I went to academy, is it's all propane fed fires. So that's how they simulate their fires with propane. And then I remember when they turned the propane on and it was coming down the tube to get to the point of ignition to where it would come out. Um, what really got me wasn't necessarily the fire, it was the sound of that propane turning on and coming down the tube before it ignited. Sounded like screaming, and the screaming sounded like my screaming in my head when the accident happened. And so when the fire finally came out and it was going across the ceiling over the top of us, I was a bit frozen at the time and I couldn't really honestly move, and I was really fearful for just a moment. And as the fire actually got like right to my head, and as soon as it went past my head, the realization is that I had my armor on, I had bunker gear, and it was completely fine, and that I was under control with all of this. And it's like when the fire went over me, it's like it grabbed all my fear and it took it with it. And I had that realization and that epiphany in that moment of like, well, I've got this. There's absolutely nothing to be afraid of. And from that moment forward, like I have had zero fear. Like, don't get me wrong, I respect fire and I understand how fire works and I have a relationship with it. But it absolutely does not scare me at all.
Yeah, I kind of can agree with you that when I was in my motorcycle accident in Florida, I my friend brought his motorcycle over when I was home and had me go for a quick ride on it, mainly just to deal with it, because he's like, if you don't get back
Mhm.
on a bike now, you'll never get back on a bike. And
Yeah.
I think it is that sense where, to be able to conquer your fear and to be able to truly understand and vibe with it. I'm sure in a way it was a release. Now the screams that were coming down the tube, like what this define the screams? Were they your screams? Like where are the screams and why screaming?
Well, this just the sound of the propane pressurizing in the line and then coming down to that. So imagine you turn on a hose, right, on the front of your house. It's going to take
Yep.
water a second to get from one end to the other end. And during that process, it's like pushing air and other things out, right? Well, when they were like pressurizing that line to get the propane at the end of it to start the fire, that sound of the propane traveling through that pipe in my mind sounded like screaming, and like that part of my memory came back of like when I was screaming when I was on fire. And I'd never experienced that until that moment. Like I had not had anything else before ever trigger something like that. I mean, I've heard it plenty of times after now, going through academy, we heard it all the time. And so, I mean, it's just background white noise to me now. But in that one particular moment, it just that's how it triggered me. Is it just made me think of the screaming sounds I made when I was on fire.
Now, with that being said, are you dealing with like complete flashback? Like, are you going back to 6 years old and everything is the way it was for a second? Or are you still just with everybody in the fire department doing the drill? Like, where's your mind at this point when the
Oh, I
fire
was
hits the ceiling and you're just looking around? Like,
oh, I was 100% right there in that moment. I just literally just couldn't move for a split second. You know, it was just kind of like when you see something that just absolutely terrifies you, and you know it's that fight or flight moment. It was literally just kind of like that small time paralysis. You know, I definitely didn't take me back to the day. I didn't leave where I was fully aware that I was surrounded by the other candidates that were there in that time. It was just literally, it brought that memory up. It made me slightly think of it, but I was 100% aware and fixed on what was going on.
That's awesome. No, I love the part about dealing with the fear. That's why I actually have a snake in the house, a ball python, because I used to be afraid of snakes. And don't get me wrong, there are some snakes I'm very afraid of, like, you know, the ones that are like highly venomous that'll, you know,
Yeah.
bite you where you bleed out from every orifice, you know, those type of snakes. But ball pythons are actually pretty nice. And to get over my fear, I bought the snake, I handled the snake, and you know, I kept the snake as a pet, you know. So it's like being able to put yourself in a position, I think, is a beautiful thing, because it's a true form of exposure therapy and allowing yourself to be comfortable with what you're typically not. And I think by being able to put yourself in that realm, it really kind of diversifies your mindset, the patterns about what you think. And in your case, you know, you can have a relationship with fire, and every time that somebody lights a match, you're not hiding under a table. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
there's a lot of, you know, meat to that. So with all of this and working with the children, what do you think your purpose is moving forward? Like, where does Terry go now? Like, where's Terry's vision and story taking them?
It's actually a really good question because I'm really at the beginning of that particular chapter of my life. For me personally, it's sharing my story, sharing my experiences through life, sharing my perspective, because I honestly believe that not one of, the greatest thing that each and every one of us have is that of our story, right? Like, our story is something that when we share it with other people, it makes other people better. And so for me, I'm a huge mental health advocate for everybody, because life is just plain up sometimes very difficult to live with. And if you get stuck in your own head and you're fighting with yourself, especially for me personally, I understand that sometimes you can be your worst enemy, and sometimes somebody will come along and they'll say something that just flips a switch, and you're just like, oh, wait a minute, hang on. All right, well, I'm just in my own way, or whatever have the situation. My goal in life now is to just share my story as much as I can, bring the lessons and perspectives that I've been learning up until this point. Because, you know, a lot of people ask me, they're like, hey, if you could go back and then do this all over again and to where you didn't have to go through this, would you? And I say, absolutely not. You know, I wouldn't change a single thing because, you know, for me personally, this has been a path that nobody else has walked before me. And so this gives me a very unique angle and a very unique perspective of life that, you know, not many have seen. So for me to be able to share the things that I've been through could really impact and change the lives of many others out there. So for me, I've been working on my social medias to try and get those up, sharing my story. I'm working on becoming motivational speaker. I really want to work a lot with the fire departments because even though I'm no longer a firefighter, I understand that mental health awareness for our first responders is paramount. The things that they go through, the things that they see, the things that they struggle with, you know, and we all put them on this pedestal and they're treated like they're Batman, Superman, and we don't think that they're just humans when they see the worst side of our society, you know. And so my whole thing is to go out and just help people. And the best way I know how to do that is through my story because, you know, I mean, I've been through a lot, I've seen a lot. And so if anything that I can share with anybody else helps them through a moment in their
Yep.
own life, you know, it's one of those things that it's a ripple effect. So if my story impacts you and then you go out and impact somebody else, you know, eventually it's going to multiply and multiply and multiply. And in today's world, man, it's darker than it's ever been, and we need that. We need that more than ever right now. And so that's where my path is to really just get my light out there and shine it as much as I can.
Well, I think you're doing it, and the biggest thing is you're bringing it back to the younger generations, and I think that's the biggest thing is sharing your experience with those who need it the most, and those are other burn victims. Because regardless of the age, when you go through something like that, it's a recalculation of self, life,
Mhm.
accessibility, what you can and can't do. And it really can weigh a lot on people. And when we talk about like suicide rates and all these other things, people with your voice, your specialty, your select understanding of a very unique situation, is invaluable, because there's so many people that will unfortunately have to experience something like that. Maybe it's not their whole body, but you know what I
Mhm.
mean? And be able
Yeah.
to do that. Now, let me ask you a question. As a person who has been disformed by your ear injury, have you ever looked at another person after this? And even for you, as somebody that's experienced with all of the bandaging and all the surgeries and everything, where it's taken you a minute to really deal with somebody, or whether it be a young person or an old person?
I've never really had that experience per se, but it does make me think of one thing particularly. Now, there's a an organization called the Phoenix Society, and they hold these gatherings called World Burn Congress, and it's literally the largest burn organization in the world. They have lots of resources, lots of tools, and they literally span from every walk of life to every age to just about every kind of burn and intensity of that burn you can think of. And I've spent time around burn children a lot just because of going to the camps and working with the kids. However, it was a lot to take in when I went to my very first World Burn Congress, because now I was exposed to adults that are on many different levels. Some adults have very small burns, some adults have extreme burns, burns worse than mine. And each and every one of them was at a different stage in their journey of recovery. So it was a lot to really take in. Uh, Not necessarily because of their burns, just like I'm a very empathic person, so like that was just a lot to take in at that point, anyways. But it did really weird me out for a minute, just because I hadn't had that exposure myself, And so, I mean, yeah, I mean, I stared at myself at that point in time for a couple decades. But to see other people in that, it did take my brain some adjusting in order to actually really wrap myself around it. Like it was only 3 days, but I mean, it still took me like a couple of days after leaving to really digest what it was that I was like, where I was at. You know what I mean?
Now, is this one of the things where you're like, wow, like these are my people? Or is it, wow, like I didn't realize how big this community really is of people that are like me or similar to my story or somehow relate, or, were burned themselves? Like, is it one of those situations where it's a positive? Is it a negative? Is it indifferent?
At first, it was so overwhelming that it kind of started off negative. Like I didn't know how to process it. But then it really rolled into the whole um, sorry, trying to fish that one back from the brain.
Yeah.
It started off as a negative, but it did roll into a positive, because it really started to make me realize, like, wow, okay, because again, I really only worked with a lot with burn children, so this was really the introduction to the adult side of this, which is a whole different ball game. Children, given the opportunity, as we both discussed, children will bounce back from this if you give them the room in the environment. I mean, 9 times out of 10, when it comes to the rehabilitation to a burn child, it's not
Hmm.
the children that need the rehabilitation, it's the parents. The parents need the rehabilitation because they don't want to watch their kid go through the bullying, the teasing. They don't want them to get hurt. But I mean, kids will work their way through that. Adults, on the other hand, they're way different. They're already mentally wired to be the person that they were before. And now they're changing that. They're rewiring it. They're learning how to use their new body. They're trying to get used to the way that they look. And as you and I both know, like every adult is uniquely individual, right? So it's going to be very unique to how they handle the process. And, I've always said that there's like three stages of being a burn survivor, right? You have a burn victim, you have somebody that's the, oh, poor me, like this happened, why did this happen? I was in that stage. We all
Yeah.
started off in that stage. Then you have the burn survivor, and that's the person that's just like, okay, you know what, this shit happened, it is what it is. Okay, I'm going to pick up the pieces and I'm just going to do what I can to move forward, right? And then you have like where I'm at, the burn thriver. I've become a firefighter. I've embraced it. I've realized that this has set me aside as a very unique individual with a very special set of gifts. um, and when you're working with adults, until you really kind of get to start talking to them, you don't know what stage they're in, and you're always afraid is, are they in the victim stage? And if they're in the victim stage, how do you approach that without being damaging yourself? And if they're in the survivor stage, like, then okay, cool, what kind of things can I talk to them about? I had to learn that really quickly when I went to the World Burn Congress, because I would meet one person, and I know where I stand as a burn survivor. I know what my whole thing is, but I didn't know what this next person was going to be like, and it was very difficult to be weary of, am I going to offend them if I ask questions? Or And it was just a lot to take in.
That's
The dog.
interesting. Oh, go. Sorry, I thought you were done. Go ahead.
Oh, no, you're good, you're good.
I was gonna say that's interesting that you're worried about offending somebody when in return your full understanding of what they're going through, and what they probably have suffered and dealt with. Where does the insecurity of offending somebody that has the same situation like you come into play? Like where would I guess even the discomfort of having that conversation with the person, being a lived experience expert?
Because in the experience I did get in the hospital from roommates who were adults compared to roommates who were kids was a day and night difference for me when I was younger. And so I guess it
Okay.
was kind of a learned behavior early. Because when I was a kid, I would straight up ask my roommate, hey, what happened to you? And if it was a kid, it was usually like, oh, well, this happened. And then it was like, cool, hey, what cartoons are we going to watch? But adults tended to be a lot more angrier
Mm.
that roommates for me, because again, like them, they have a lot more changes going on than what I had as a kid. So I guess it was ingrained into me very early that adults don't necessarily like to talk about what happened. They like to just talk about the after effect of the healing and the moving forward and picking things up and going on. They don't want to necessarily talk about that trauma. So as an adult myself, I always try to be conscious about like where they are on their journey, because I mean, it could range from anything of like, hey, I fell asleep with a cigarette and the couch caught on fire.
Yeah.
Or you could be, or it could be a domestic abuse situation, that something, very drastic
Oh
and
yeah.
very traumatic happened, and you don't necessarily want to pull that trauma forward. For in my mind, I don't want to pull that trauma forward for my own curiosity, because I don't know where they're at in that journey. And you know I just try to be conscious of something like that. As adults, it's crapshoot. Most of the time, when kids get burned, it's usually something fairly simple. They pulled a coffee pot off of the stove, or their gown caught on fire when they were using candles during the stormy night, or whatever. Adults, it's such a wide range of what could have been. I just try to be conscious in my own mind of where that might put them if you ask them.
No, when you put it that way, it'd be very eye-opening, because you could be dealing with one where it's a freak accident, and then
Mhm.
you can deal with one that was very malicious, where it was an ex-husband, through a nasty divorce, that set his ex-wife on fire.
Yeah.
So in a way, that actually kind of opened my mind on trying to understand people. And I think that's a great observation that you made, is trying to figure out, because not everybody, even you in the beginning, we're happy about it, or we're content with the fact that it's going to be okay. I
Mhm.
think, I'm sure in the denial stages and the anger stages, it's a living hell until you can find some peace.
Exactly. It really is. And that's when you really kind of notice that's why I like to say, like, you're either in that burn victim or that burn survivor stage. And so it really has a lot of moving pieces to it when it's an adult. Like I said, kids, they're super simple when it comes to that point in time. You just give them that environment and they're really set to go.
Now, what is like a big misconception? Like, if like I when I do my panels, sometimes I run along the line of a question that I ask my panelists. What is one misconception about being a burn victim in your case, that you wish people would stop believing?
Um, So really one of them is the fact that we don't like to talk to other people. Like they're going to be people often think that, oh, I don't want to go up and ask them what happened because I don't want them to get upset, or I don't want to disturb them. And so they typically will just leave it alone and then just kind of go along their way. But it's really a misconception, because if you see a burn survivor who's already out and about, let's just say you run into them in the mall, and you see someone and you're like, oh man, I wonder what happened to him. A lot of people's initial thought is to say, well, I'm not going to ask him because maybe he doesn't want to talk about it. Maybe he is uncomfortable, or whatever. That is a huge misconception. I can almost guarantee you that if you're around a burn survivor in a public place, we would most certainly prefer you to actually come up and ask us what happened. And the reason behind that is because a couple of different things. For me personally, when I'm out in public, and I hear it a lot, and as a parent, you'll definitely be able to understand this. I hear kids a lot will say, like, "Mommy, Daddy, what's wrong with that man's face?" And it usually goes one of two different ways. It usually will end up like, parents will grab their kids and whisk them away, and they'll just say like, "Stop staring at them," or "Stop, stop, stop," or whatever. But then, you have the other parents that I will perk up and listen. And you have the other parents who will be like, you know what, sweetheart, I don't know what's wrong with that guy. How about we go ask them? And I'll hear the whole conversation. And I'm excited to be a part of that, because not only am I able to be a learning opportunity between you and your child for, somebody who might look different, but you're going to allow me to actually voice who I am to your child and make them understand that there are people in this world that do look different. And it's because sometimes things happen. I've even had it even go is off. I've so far off the rail. One time, I heard a little kid, just do the whole thing. Mom, what's wrong with that man's face? And I straight up heard that lady say, "Well, that's what the bad man gets for playing with fire," and then just left it at that. And
Oh,
I was completely appalled. Like, I took it out of my time to go over to her and tell her my story, and I even told her, and I was like, "Hey, look, um, you know, you really should teach your kid to actually be curious to begin with, but to actually get the facts on things. Don't come up with your own personal, explanation on things." So for me, a lot of people think that, it's too uncomfortable for the burn survivor to be able to tell their story. Well, let me just tell you, they're already out in public. They're willing to be able to tell you their story. And a lot of us would prefer that you come over and ask, instead of just making your assumptions or just walking away with no answer.
I think that's great because I feel by my own observation, or maybe pre-thought, that people maybe not want to talk about it. So hearing you say that people do want to talk about it gives me great insight to want to have these conversations if I was ever to encounter somebody out in public, and not feel like I'm bothering them, and feel
Mhm.
like they will actually get a good response from this. Because I think in a way too is, you in my case, in the outside looking in, it's, well, you're exactly right. Well, I don't want to bring up his trauma, or maybe he's having a nice day and I hate to ruin it if he doesn't want to have that conversation. But that's why I love that answer, because it's not necessarily like that. It's more of a way for you to be an advocate for yourself, an advocate for burn victims, and I really like the sense that you had the decency and the integrity in yourself to go over and to self-educate. We've done that with my honey, my service animal. She's a pit bull, and we've had several comments about her being vicious and people being scared. And in a way, we have done the exact same thing, where it's like, okay, well, let me tell you her story. Let me educate you. Let me explain why you should or should not feel this way. Because in a way, who else is going to teach this? And I also think today, in a way, is we live in such a diverse world. Disabilities, like dyeing your hair pink, it's so normalized, because it's so exposed, because of mental health being in the forefront, because of research and technology, testimonial, story. And I think it's a better way to deal with it, even though I haven't dealt with what you have, in my own sense of just having these conversations helps me feel like I'm doing a service to other people by holding a space where people can tell their story. You know what I mean? So whatever role that we play, that forward thought that this is changing somebody, I think is the greatest reason why we would do any of these things, because if not, you mentioned it, you're just in the victim mentality. Poor me, why me? This is fucked up. My life's over, and in today's world, it does not matter. You don't even have to have arms and legs, and you can be on stage speaking in front of millions of people. And there's a guy that actually does that. You know what I mean? So I think it's great what you do. What would you say to people out there who think because of what you're going through, you're limited?
There's a saying that I like that goes along the lines of, he who says he can and he who says he can't are both generally right.
Yes.
The only person that will ever have the weight and the capacity to tell you that you cannot do something is you, and you alone. Nobody else holds that pen other than yourself. So for me personally, when a lot of people would tell me like, oh, well, you can't do something, I'll tell you what, man, spite's a hell of a thing. It gave me more fuel to go out there and do something and do it harder than anybody else. And my dad learned that with me at a very early age. My dad learned how to use reverse psychology on me and be like, oh, I don't think you can do that, Terry. Maybe you should take it easy. And be like, you know what, Dad, you watch me, I'm going to go do this, and then I'd go do it. And, now that I'm older and I understand what he was doing,
it's like, son of a bitch, he played me this entire time.
Yep, exactly. But it showed me, though, personally, that, hey, like, in those moments, it really gave me the forefront to think about, okay, you know what? If I can't do this exactly the same way everybody else can, how can I do it? And if I have to do this slightly different, or if I have to do this completely different than somebody else, as long as I come up with the same exact results at the end, it doesn't matter how you get to point A to point B. It might be by truck, train, or car. You don't know, but either which way, you made it from point A to point B. And that's the whole goal, right?
Yeah. No, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. You ever seen the movie?
Oh yeah. It's been a while, but yep, I definitely have.
Okay, cool. Because you have to watch Into the Void, and if you hadn't seen Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, that's a funny one. They tried to do a remix with
like a couple years ago
with Robert Downey Jr. and Zach Galifianakis, or whatever his name is. It just wasn't. It just wasn't in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I'm sorry, John Candy killed it in that movie.
Oh yeah, you can't replace John Candy.
So, as we are about to close out, I'm going to ask you the question that that's my bonus round in my panel. And this is I would like you to audibly um, write a letter to your younger self. You're 6 years old, and the letter is designed to write to you right before you got into the carport, and maybe 3 to 4 sentences about what you would tell yourself, because you said you wouldn't change anything. So if you're not going to change anything, and if life repeats itself, which some say that it does, and you were, you're Marty from Back to the Future, and you're going to have to quickly explain to yourself what's going to happen and what your life is going to look like and how you're going to get through it, what would you say to yourself?
That's a good one. I would say, hey, dude, things are going to get real hard and real dark real quick, but you are stronger than you know, and you have greater purpose than you know, and you're going to become a man that you can absolutely be proud of one day.
That's fantastic. That is really awesome. I think a lot of times, hindsight is, what do they say? Hindsight's 20/20 for a reason.
2020. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's, what we don't know is what we don't know. And I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times in the future, we don't know if it's going to be okay. People deal with that all the time. They don't have to be, a victim of anything,
Mm-hmm.
and that uncertainty, and to really confine that into yourself, I think is the biggest thing, because it's the perpetual motivation of moving forward, is that discipline that I believe and I know that somehow things will get better. And by living and going through this journey or this experience, I somehow will thrive and benefit. And I also really like too the perspective as that outlook. Right now I'm actually starting my work with Honey, who's also my service animal, but we just started our therapy work. We had actually our second therapy training today. We were at an assisted living home.
Oh, cool.
And there's this guy named Pastor Rick. You can watch his commencement speech on YouTube, and he talks about hospice and the dying. And right now I'm actually reading this book, which I think you might enjoy. It's on Spotify for free, and it was recommended to me by one of my leadership mentors. We always have mentors. It's Death and Dying, what the dying have to teach doctors, nurses, clergy, and their own. And what it does is it talks about like the different stages of death, how people perceived it, and kind of like what you were talking about earlier when you were younger as a person, people weren't talking to you, they were too afraid. So they were having these conversations about your medical needs or about what's going on with you with other people. And it really detracts from you being a part of your own healing journey and what that's like. And the fact that some people, even doctors, will call in therapists when they can't manage patient relationship conversations anymore. And they talk about how that can be negative because it takes that personal connection away.
Yeah.
And, when you're in a situation like that, I believe that, part of that healing is that connection. All those nurses, all those doctors, even if it was just somebody coming to change your bandage and you were in and out of consciousness, just knowing that you are being taken care of. I believe, from outside looking in, of course, that's probably part of the healing process too.
Oh, most certainly is. That makes me think of like when my accident very first happened. Uh, the nurses and the doctors had to wear like Tyvek white suits, right? And the white masks, so like everybody looked the same. And at that stage, every time I saw somebody, it always meant some form of pain. Like pain was coming when that person walked into the room, right? There was one person that used to write her name on her Tyvek suit, and then she would come in, she would talk to me, Even though I wasn't able to see, she would tell me exactly who she was, what she was about to do. She would talk to me through the whole process of doing it. And even though I couldn't physically respond to her, I emotionally and mentally responded to her because she was treating me as a person. She wasn't treating me as a patient. And she was taking the most basic necessities that any human needs, and that's to be heard and talked to. And she gave those to me at a very critical time. And had she not done that, that would have just been continuous repeat terror of somebody just coming in my room, changing my bandages and being scared about it, you know? Um, and I've actually done classes at hospitals with aspiring nurses and staff called bedside manner classes. Essentially, is what I've called them. And it's really just to open up the floor to talk to the medical professionals for them to ask me questions that they can't necessarily ask an active patient because it may not be appropriate. But I also really tell them, like, you guys are, you have to treat the mental side of a patient just as much, if not more, than you're treating the physical side. Because to me, healing is 90% mental, 10% physical. And I'm a very firm believer in that because I've seen survivors that have had burns less than what I've had and go downhill and tank, and their surgeries fail one after another, after another, after another, because they're not mentally in the game. They're just physically in the game. So yeah, I treating people like people in those environments is one of the best things that you can do.
Yeah, and that's what the priest was talking about during the commencement speech is, you know, um he said, I've sat at the bedside of thousands of people who have taken their last breath, and through the work that I'm trying to do in my own crazy way, I kind of want to be able to say, hundreds, maybe not thousands, but I want to be able to be in that situation because he said what the dead or soon to be dead have to say about life. He said they don't play around. They're very, very direct. And most of it is about relationships. It's not about
Mhm.
items. It's not about success. It's not about achievement. It's not about the things that in life that we are so chasing. And he
Mhm.
said that one of the biggest things, and you have already hit it nail on the head, is when you have these conversations, is making the person feel loved. And that could be just a general conversation. That could be shaking somebody's hand or just being in the room with somebody. But that presence, just like that nurse who wrote her name, that allowed you to know that you're still a human and that you're still here, is what he was talking about. Is just so powerful. And that when
Mhm.
you do that type of work, that's the critical point and key that you have to have, is that you have to make the person feel loved or heard or validated, because a lot of times, from what he was saying, that's all they have left. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And I think that's really cool for you to take the time to go and volunteer your time and have people ask you hard questions so you can help doctors. Because without, even with what I'm doing with the university, which I'm soon about to release, it's called, their term is peer reviewed research. And,
Mhm.
I think you should write several books, and I'm serious. And you can start with an ebook online. I use ChatGPT and I wrote my first ebook. I
I'm
have it on my
actually in the middle
website.
of one right now.
You should, because your perspective and your mindset is of, one, the survivor, and two, of the mentally healed. And that's a big thing because, you know, just from the outside looking in, you have 2 minutes of being on fire. Then you have however long it takes to get you to the hospital. Then you're out for about 2 months in comas, right? That's
Mhm.
still, even though that may be like 90 days, right, from the initial tragedy in the beginning, you're not counting the rest of your life that you have to live. So, and I think that's an important fact that you brought up is it's not just healing the wound, it's healing the person, because once you're healed, you're released from the hospital. But now you have to adapt to reality again. Now somebody that fit in life perfectly as a normal 6-year-old now has to find his place again. You know what I mean? It's like starting from square one. Talk a little bit about that.
Uh, you know, I was lucky enough in the hospital that I actually had some people that was really able to, put love into me while I was in the hospital, because again, my family wasn't really there all the time. One of the things that was really cool was that one of the fire departments in Seattle every once in a while would come and get me from the hospital and take me down to the firehouse and make dinner, and then I'd get to hang out with a house full of firefighters, and they would take me back. And I'd even had one nurse, Sue, that was at the hospital, that was allowed to every once in a while take me home to her place. And she had a son that I would play with every once in a while. So I had little tidbits here and there that were sewn into my story that gave me the concept and the thinking of like, well, when I do get out into society, like there are good people, like there are. So for me, like when it came to dealing with the other people that were really not so understanding and that would really give me hell, more or less, to say, um, I still had a section of my brain that knew like there's good people out here, and over a period of time, I was slowly finding them. My very first friend out of school, his name was, or when I started school, his name was Bo. And Bo treated me like no different, just like my family. And I eventually started to find for myself personally that there are a lot of good people, and those are the people that you need to surround yourself with, because when you do have a down day or you do have a stretch of time where things are difficult, those are the people that are going to help post you up, and help you lean into, to be able to get through those times when you don't feel loved or worthy or acceptable, even at that point in time. So I got really lucky that I had the little interactions that I had throughout my time of already being in the hospital. And that really helped me out when I had to get into society.
That's really awesome. I think that's great because, like I said earlier with the doctors and everybody, I mean, they play a pivotal role in not only just being there, but that's all for an extended period of time, and to build that trust in that relationship. Now, is that where the love for the fire department came into play, being there and everything like that? And then as you got older, you're like, let's do it.
Yeah, that was a huge thing. Like earlier, you asked me about superheroes and whatnot, and the reason why I just kind of chuckled at it is because, well, two reasons. I'm a burn survivor, so I don't have nipples on my chest. So instead, I have a Batman and Superman logo. Those have always been my things.
That's cool.
But my first superhero though was firefighters. Not only were the ones that saved me, but when I went to camp for the first time, most of the camp counselors are firefighters. And they really treated me as somebody that they saw me as, even when I couldn't see myself that way.
I like that. Now, have you gotten to have any conversations with any of these people nowadays? Like as of today, as you're looking back, you're educating people, you're telling your story. Have you ever had a conversation with any of those firefighters in a moment of clarity, that saved your life, or any of the nurses or the staff? Or I think it was your first mentor, I think Rick, you said his name was?
Oh, Roger. Um,
Roger.
Roger just passed away this last year.
I'm
He
so
was
sorry to hear that.
93, and
What a great life.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 93, he touched so many lives. And honestly, he was ready. Like I got to talk to him, and he was like, Terry, I've had a good life, and this is just the end of the run for it. And he wasn't sad about it. I was sad about losing him, but I wasn't, sad in the fact that we lost him. I don't feel like we lost him. He just went home, and that was his thing. But as far as like anyone prior that was a part of that process, I never got to meet the firefighters that
Mm,
actually were a part of saving me. I have met up with that nurse Sue that I was telling you about that I got to go home with and play with her kid. I've actually seen her a few times over the last few years. And then just last week, last Friday, I reconnected with one of my other burn nurses. Her name is Renee, and she started her burn career working in the burn unit the time that I was in the hospital. And she just showed me so much love and compassion that I've always remembered her over the years. I just didn't know what her last name was, so I lost contact with her. And not long ago, I actually just got information on who she was. And so we just had a Zoom meeting this last Friday, and I got to catch her up on how much changed over 33 years. You know, told her about the firefighting and all of the things that I've accomplished and all the things that I went forward to go do. And it was really awesome because those are things that I have thought about a lot over the years. You know, the people that were directly involved with me becoming the person that I am today. And in the medical industry, you get a lot of things like HIPAA that kick into play, and that'll keep you from being able to actually explore further to say, like, hey, where did Terry go? How did he do? You know, you just have to put the best foot forward you can, give this person the best opportunity, and then send them on their way. And sometimes you never know. Um, so I have gotten to talk to some of them, but with that experience in general, that actually is kind of a foundation that I've been wanting to create, was to be able to link firefighters with children that they rescue as burn survivors, to be able to like pair them up to where they can actually be a part of that child's growth, and then also get them the healing that the fire department needs. Because when I was in the fire department, you can get into just about any kind of call. You can be out on fatalities with adults, and it's like, this really sucks, you know. But when anything ever involved a child, it was a whole different ballgame, and it was so much more somber. Because I mean, adults, sometimes it was really the adults' situation that put them where they were, you know. And I mean, it still sucks when you have situations, but children were always that unspoken rule of like, it was a lot to carry. So I've actually designed a program that would link firefighters with children to actually be like a growing partnership between the two because of all of that.
I think, just like my wife said in the chat here, I think that's an awesome mission. And, please let me know if you ever decide to do an event. I would love to play a role and being a part of that event in any way. I think that would be an awesome idea because it can create more firefighters, first responders, being able to meet your heroes and not just the people that, wear capes and that we know online, but the true people. Because, I always believe, and I'm very pro law enforcement and first responders. It
Hmm.
is the backbone of America as far as our safety and resource and when things go wrong. And there are some
Hmm.
people out there who are just incredible, who have
Yeah.
given life over limb. And, those people really should be able to have a way, because I'm sure in a way it's closure. It's a
Yeah.
way of dealing with their trauma, being able
Yep.
to see. I mean, I'm sure a lot of times, I was a firefighter for a very small portion of time, like 3 months, only a red hat. So nothing exciting. I did it during college. I do want to get back into it. But when I was there, I mainly just hung out at the station and I went on some rides, but I didn't get to do anything because I was a red hat. But anyways,
Hmm.
I some of those times, just talking to some of the firefighters and on the calls, you never know what happens to those people. And
Yeah.
to see somebody like you who is exemplified not only healing but storytelling, being able to change other people's lives, importantly children who are still impressionable, who still have a future, who still have purpose. An adult, like you said, they're in their ways, they're old, whatever. But to know, for a first responder to be able to shake hands or give somebody a hug that they saved, I mean, that's like a movement like times 10.
Hmm. Yeah, no, 100%. And, you know, I really saw it because when I was in academy, and by the time I got to academy, and I'd already wondered what happened to the firefighters or the paramedics that put me in that ambulance and took me to the hospital. I'd already wondered about that. But there was a scenario that had happened, and essentially one of the cadets did something that really pissed off one of the instructors. And so he stopped everybody and he smoked us for like 30 minutes. In other words, made us really work out really hard and like just pushed us to our limit. And he sat down and he told us a story about one of the very first calls he ever went on, that he found at this house that he went to that was on fire. He found these two little girls that were in a room and he saw them from the outside. And he went to go get the hose off the truck and then go back and get those girls. Well, he did exactly what the cadet did that pissed him off. And he slipped and he hurt himself, and he didn't get back to those girls in time, and they perished in the fire. So that
Mm.
was a trauma that I noticed came out of him. And it had been 20 plus years that he said at that point in time, but it was still something that impacted him so significantly, even decades later, that he was very passionate about it. And then that really made me start thinking, like, okay, what else is under your rug? How many other calls have you been on that has caused you to lose sleep? And, you know, thinking to myself, like, man, well, I would have loved to have met the firefighters that rescued me to be able to show them, like, hey, I'm good, I made it, you know. And not only did I make it, look what I'm doing. And if it wasn't for
Yeah.
you, I wouldn't be here, you know. And that's why summer burn camps for kids are staffed heavily with firefighters and EMS, is because even though they aren't necessarily the ones that had anything to do with the rescuing of those kids, their brothers or sisters with the same exact training and the same exact drive and determination did that somewhere else. And now they get to see the after effects of it. So for them, they get that beneficial aspect to see that what I do or what I do matters. You know what I mean?
Oh, it matters big time, dude. I mean, you have an ability to change minds, lives, people. I mean, it's very powerful, and that's why even with the platform Vindec Eu, I heal. You know, it's you heal yourself and then you heal others. You know, and that ability is a superpower, and that kind of makes us all super heroes too,
Uh-huh.
because you know to have the compassion to one take care of yourself, but then to take on the burden of other people, you know,
Yeah.
and try to navigate them and deal with what they're dealing with and understand them. I mean, that's a lot of weight, you know what I mean? And you still are dealing, and I'm sure some days, you know, not every day is, you know, sunshine and rainbows for anybody, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So it's really cool. I really like your mission. I think, you know,
Thank
that's
you.
the biggest thing is healing and having that and being able to talk about that day, you know, because maybe nobody was around except those people, you know. So I really, really value what you do, Terry. I think that's really, really cool, dude.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, I tell people all the time is that, you know, the best thing that you can do in life is really, truly, and utterly fall in love with yourself, right? And a lot of people think that that's really cheesy to
Mhm.
say something like that, but it couldn't be the furthest thing from the truth, because when you love yourself, you start to work on healing those traumas. And the best
Yes.
way to start healing those traumas is to get comfortable with them. There's some trauma that you will never get rid of, that's going to be with you until the day you close your eyes and you leave this earth. But that doesn't mean that you can't get comfortable with it in your life. You know, for me, that was telling my story. That was sharing my story. Every time I tell my story, that is me sitting with my trauma and actually learning to bear it a little bit more. And so, you know, that's just the best that we can all do, is share our stories and learn how to fall in love with ourselves. And when we start to do that, then we start to look through the eyes of love and compassion. And then that's where things really start to take off for you, you know?
No, I 100% agree with that. And that's the thing about, in my opinion, of doing what's called great work. And that's something that's bigger than you, that's, purpose and driven because you have a calling or you have some, feeling in your heart that you just know what you're doing is invaluable and that the world needs to hear this and the world will will see value in it and value from it. And I think that's the biggest thing is it's all about story,
Exactly.
and what do you do with that? So to wrap this up, because I definitely want to have you back on for another episode sometime soon. I also think so too is, you said that, this is your first podcast you've ever been on. You're a very good talker. I think you should get some podcasts going with some first responders, or some other people, some doctors, because I'd love to sit and listen to you talk to like a medical profession, on like some really graphic stuff and details that, is their realm house as well. And I think that could be a great avenue for you, especially, building that connection is what if you could find a survivor and a first responder and you connect them on your podcast. And that's what you do is aside from like the physical side of your mission. I think, there's so much value, and with heart, the opportunity is endless.
Yeah. No, and you know what? I think that's a fantastic idea, and that's an iron I'll definitely put in the fire.
Yeah, dude, you have to. I mean, this is podcast number 1. So now technically you have to shoot your second podcast, and that'll be with somebody different. You know what I mean? And you'll get to really carry it, because I think a lot of people will really like to hear what you have to say. So I know I did. Before we go, Terry, where can people find and support you?
Oh, that's a good question. You can find me on TikTok with Phoenix Down. That's actually the name of the book I'm currently writing, which is my memoir, but I have that channel there. I'm also on YouTube is Terry McCarty. And then Instagram is Phoenix Down with Terry. And all three of those are kind of the same style of setting, just on the different platforms.
Fantastic. And then we have 2 comments I want to read to you, and then we are out. So first comment says, what an amazing opportunity to work through your fears. You did an amazing job working through the fire drill that was posted earlier. And then Lacey, Lynn's mom, said, yes, you were so brave to push past your fear. So very awesome, by the way. So what we're going to do is I'm going to do a little outro. You'll stay on. I'll end the live, and then we'll be backstage, and then we'll be done. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right, everybody. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this wonderful podcast with Terry. Also, please, if you're in the area of Fredericksburg and you are available September 26th, Thursday, I was at 6:30 at Always Flavored in downtown Fredericksburg. I'd like to invite you to my Vindec Eu Healing the Hustle mental health panel, which we have monthly. We've had 2 events so far, and they were fantastic. And we carry them each month, and I am looking for panelists. So if you're watching this podcast and feel inspired to tell your story, I would love for you guys to come out. Other than that, we have a lot coming up with Vindec Eu, our coaching, and much, much more. And if you feel inspired, we have a trauma-informed coaching program that's 12 weeks that we'll be talking more about as well. But it has been a fantastic night, and I really appreciate everybody being here, and we will see you guys next time.